hurry to leave the US? Here are 3 countries you can move to today. How to move out of the US. Trump's victory sparks rise in Americans looking to leave the country. Do you want to leave the US? If so, you are by far not the only person. In the aftermath of the 2024 election, CNN, Newsweek, USA Today, Forbes, and many other news outlets have published articles either giving advice on how to leave the country or marveling over how many people have said they're going to. Much of this discussion seems to be happening on social media, particularly on Twitter, which I refuse to call X, or on TikTok. This makes it a bit difficult to gauge how many people are actually considering moving. To get a better overview, let's check out some data on Google Trends. I generated this chart to compare how frequently US Americans searched different terms between December of 2023 and December of 2024. The blue line on this chart represents the search "move to Canada," while the red line represents "move to Europe." The yellow line shows the search "leave the US." All 3 terms clearly spike sharply on election day before tapering off. It looks like we also have a slight spike following the certification of the electors' votes and leading into the inauguration, but I did generate this chart a couple of days ago, so that spike might be more or less pronounced than it looks like it is going to be in this chart. That said, this kind of spike isn't unheard of. A similar spike was seen after Trump's first victory in 2016. Because of that, CNN author Terry Ward notes that the surge of interest is unlikely to translate to a mass exodus. Moving to Canada was a hot topic after the 2016 election, but immigration statistics gathered later did not show a significant bump. Paul Beck, professor emeritus of political science at The Ohio State University, echoes the same sentiment in an article by Newsweek, where he says, quote, "There is a group of Americans, potentially large, who are so unhappy about the election outcome and 4 more years of a Trump presidency that they talk about leaving the country. Much of this, I think, is just talk out of dismay." I agree with this to an extent. A lot of the loudest voices on this topic are voices of dismay, of emotion rather than of action. Frankly, the spike in searches for basic information about moving abroad indicates this. Moving, especially internationally, is a long and difficult process that requires a lot of planning. It isn't a snap decision to be made on election night. Most of those people who are actually intending to leave the US if Trump won would have begun doing research and making plans months in advance so that they could begin setting them in motion on election day. Those that only began doing research the night of were more than likely doing so out of fear, anger, or disappointment rather than out of a solid desire or intention to move. It is possible that some of these people do go through with it and build a life for themselves abroad. You may be one of them, but that swell of searches isn't going to be representative of how many people actually end up leaving the US. That said, Trump being elected isn't the only reason why people want to leave the US right now. A lot of people have been considering this option for a long time, even if the election itself was the straw that broke the camel's back for them. You need more than political reasons for making a move, including increased quality of life, sense of adventure, being closer to family. Sacrificing time with friends and family or your hobbies just for political reasons is a hard choice. Alex Ingram, Newsweek. Exact statistics are pretty difficult to track, with estimates of how many Americans are living abroad at any given time varying widely. Despite that, it seems fair to say that interest in moving abroad has increased quite a bit over the last decade or so. Educational opportunities, financial opportunities, and cost of living in the US have played a role in this, as have political tensions, safety concerns, and access to healthcare. I'm not going to try to outline all of the reasons someone might have for leaving. If you're here and you've made it this far into the video, you probably already have your own reason. Maybe it's a concern for healthcare, for civil rights, the crumbling social safety net, or your own personal safety. I don't want to give you a reason, and I don't want to convince you to leave. I just want to give you a realistic look into what the experience has been like for me, so that if you do decide to make that choice for yourself, you have an idea of what to expect. So, what was my reason? Hi, I'm an American who's been living in Germany for about 3 years. That means I've been out of the States, with the exception of a couple of family visits, since 2022. I left the US for a lot of reasons, honestly. All of the main reasons played into it. Finances, healthcare, politics, all that. But so did other more positive things. Educational opportunities and social connection abroad, and a deep fondness for where I would end up settling. Politics were the major catalyst of my move, though they weren't everything. And Trump himself was barely a consideration in my choice personally. My breaking point was April 13th, 2023. The Attorney General of Missouri used an executive action to severely limit access to gender-affirming healthcare for transgender adults in the state. Again, this was an executive action, not a bill. It was signed into effect without ever being voted on, purely on the power of the AG. I, if you haven't guessed it, am a transgender adult. I am not myself from Missouri, but seeing this precedent set, that my rights could be signed away with no due process, well, I knew I wouldn't be going back to the US anytime soon. This was not the first attack on trans rights in recent years, and it has sadly not been the last by far. It was, however, the nail in the coffin for me. I'm not going to retell my entire story here, but the short of it is that I was studying abroad in Germany at the time, a stay that was only supposed to last a year. As soon as I decided to stay, I began sending out university applications and taking care of all of the logistics necessary to remain in the country. It was a difficult process, both practically and emotionally, but I'm positive that I've made the best choice for myself in the situation. A lot of people are thinking about leaving, for a lot of reasons. I know a lot of other trans people specifically who are considering fleeing, whether from their home states or the country as a whole, out of fear for their own safety or out of concern for their access to health care and basic rights. It has become depressingly common to see trans people online asking, "Where should I go? What states will be safe?" Or even, "Should I leave the country?" Should you leave the country? Maybe. I did. But again, my life isn't your life. And moving abroad isn't going to be the solution for everyone. A lot of online trans spaces have become pretty divided about this question. The same is probably true for other minority groups and perhaps for leftist groups, but I have mostly seen it in trans spaces, so I'm going to speak to that experience, though I also have some thoughts that I will extrapolate out to be relevant to anyone thinking about moving abroad, especially if you're thinking about leaving for political reasons. The controversy over this question of whether or not people should leave seems to be twofold. On the one hand, there are people who argue that moving abroad won't make a difference anyway. it won't really improve the quality of life of the individuals who move. Often, these arguments cite the difficulties of moving in the first place and point out that many other countries are just as transphobic as the United States, if not worse. Even if a given country is better for trans people now, these people argue, there's no guarantee it will remain that way. The global rise of right-wing sentiment is unlikely to leave any country fully unscathed. I'm not really interested in arguing against this position, at least not right now, because I agree with the majority of the sentiment. Moving is hard, the future is uncertain, and leaving the US won't solve all of your problems. Those are all things to keep in mind when you're coming to a decision. What I am far more interested in is the second position I've seen people take against moving abroad. The idea that by moving, you are abandoning the people who cannot move, and you're giving up a community that you should instead be staying and fighting for. Being able to choose to move is a privilege. It is significantly more accessible to some people than it is to others. By its very nature, it isn't something that everyone can or should do. But it is something I think people dismiss far too quickly because they assume they won't be able to do it without ever looking at what would actually be required. Depending on what country you're interested in, the barrier to entry might be far lower than you think. You may be able to get into an English language university program with only your high school diploma, and a lower cost of living may make what money you get from selling your belongings go a whole lot further. Don't discount it as an option until you've looked at the possibilities. But what about the people who really can't move? Are you just going to leave them behind? Well, yes and no. If you are in an unstable place in the US, you might actually be able to do more good for your local community once you get out of the country, once you get out of that situation. If you're able to build a happy and healthy life for yourself abroad, one where you don't constantly have to worry about your healthcare or your basic rights, you'll have far more energy to organize around the causes that matter to you. If you're able to land a stable job that pays a living wage, you'll have more spare income to put towards mutual aid and community support. But even if that isn't the case, it still isn't morally wrong to leave. If you think that it is the best choice for you personally to move, you don't have to justify that to anyone. It is okay for you to choose to protect yourself. Choosing self-preservation isn't immoral, and it definitely doesn't make you a bad person. You don't owe it to anyone to stay in an unsafe situation. Setting that aside, should you move abroad? At the end of the day, you know your desires and your life situation best. But if you're interested in moving and you already have some of the following factors going for you, then I'd say yeah, it might be worth considering. If you already have specific educational or work opportunities in mind, such as a program you would like to apply to or a job offer, if you already have close contacts in another country, like family or close friends, or if you already have a deep knowledge of, interest in, and experience in another country, those are all green flags for moving abroad. At least a few $1,000s in savings also helps a lot. If you don't have any of those things, you can still make the process work, but it will be significantly more difficult. In fact, if you don't have any of those factors, and the main reason you're considering moving abroad is political, I would encourage you to first look at moving within the United States. Moving to a state with laws or policies that fit your needs might be a more doable option for you in that case. When you're moving abroad, you're not just moving away from the US. You're moving to someplace else. Having specific opportunities, connections, or even just familiarity with your target country makes that aspect of moving a lot more fulfilling, which in turn makes it a lot more feasible to build a new life, which is exactly what you're going to need to do. If you do decide to move, it will be very difficult. There are so many reasons not to do it. You'll have to leave things and people behind. You'll likely face xenophobia and culture shock, maybe for the first time in your life. You will, at least for a time, be facing tremendous instability as you move and get settled in a new environment. Even with all this hardship, it can be worth it. Luckily, moving doesn't have to be a lifetime decision. If it doesn't work out, the USA will most likely still be there, and you will most likely still have your citizenship. Many people who move abroad do choose to move back to the US after a couple of years. That is possible, and it doesn't mean that you've failed. It just means you're finding your way through life like anyone else. Once you've decided to move, the next question is, where to? Article after article have been written on this, from travel writers and business bloggers. I'm not an expert myself, so I can't give you any recommendations beyond my own experience, but fortunately there are plenty of resources out there. Personally, I would recommend checking out personal accounts from people who have moved, rather than relying on anything in a listicle format. Forums and blogs exist for American expat groups in many different countries, which can be a very helpful source of information and of connection. It may also be worthwhile to check Reddit, either for subreddits dedicated specifically to Americans or English speakers in your target country, or just to get a feel for the specific location you're interested in moving to. In part 2 of this series, I will be sharing my own experiences with moving abroad. I've already given an account of my relocation to Germany on this channel, which you can find, but the next video will delve into the many logistical considerations you'll face if you want to make that move as well. Specifically, we'll be looking at why Germany, where in Germany, and how to make it work. If that's of interest to you, please do keep an eye out for that video. If, however, Germany itself isn't of interest to you, but this video was helpful, please give it a like, leave a comment, or subscribe. This video is a little bit outside of my normal wheelhouse, so to speak, but it is an important topic to get out there, and every interaction that this video gets will help get more eyes on it in the algorithm. Thank you for your time, and I really do hope to see you all in the next video.